licensed therapist, and I went to a mental health conference this year where every single white male who spoke made some sort of apologetic comment for being a white man. And a few years ago, I would not have even blinked at that. I probably would have seen it as a sign of self-awareness, but I think about it a lot differently now. In all of my college and graduate school courses that had a social justice emphasis, I was taught implicitly and explicitly that men's pain matters less than everyone else's. I was taught that when men suffer, it's self-inflicted. Their pain is a natural consequence of the patriarchy. Because men set up the system, they deserve the fallout for whatever happens. And that wasn't just framed as the factually correct way to understand the world, but also as the morally correct way. So if you questioned it, people didn't see that as you questioning an idea. It was seen as dismissing the pain of marginalized people. So no one ever questioned it. And when every professor that you admire, every textbook that you're assigned, and even the American Psychological Association reinforces that worldview, it doesn't feel like a belief. It feels like reality. It's like being a fish in water. You don't even realize that you're swimming in it. But now I see how contaminated this water is and how this perspective is hurting boys and men, and I am not a happy fish. Culturally, we don't see male pain as something to empathize with. We see it as something to analyze, to correct, or to explain away. And perhaps nowhere is this more evident than in radical feminist and in leftist spaces. In those environments, male pain is not just dismissed. It's seen as a symptom of losing privilege, a kind of emotional temper tantrum. As the saying goes, to those accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. When you have that perspective in your head, it kind of gives you a get out of jail free card for ever feeling bad for anything that men experience. So when men suffer, we are safe to assume that it's not real pain. It's just discomfort about no longer being in charge. Empathy flows freely for every group, other than the people that we've decided to see as our oppressors. Which is why at the therapy conference that I attended, every white man who took the stage felt the need to apologize. Not for anything that he did, but for who he was, for how he was born. Because in this worldview, identity is not just context, it's credibility. And if you are born into the wrong identity, then your pain will not be the priority. Hi, I'm Gabby. I'm a licensed therapist on a mission to expose the misandry in academia and in the mental health field, as well as to advocate for men being treated like humans. So before we dive in, I'm going to analyze a piece of content. We are going to be critical of the ideas and the thinking that it represents, because it's really bringing out my mama bear. But this is not me attacking one random guy. This random guy is not the problem. The problem is the framework. This is the framework that I used to live inside, one that is rampant in academia and treated as factual and moral truth. These narratives are compelling because the pain that they highlight is real. Historically, women faced very real systemic barriers, but that doesn't mean that men don't also face very real systemic disadvantages. It's so critical that we be willing to acknowledge both male and female pain, as well as the systemic disadvantages that either gender has faced and continues to face. Part of growth, intellectual and emotional, is being able to pause, to question, and to rethink. As Alvin Toffler once said, the illiterate of the future are not those who cannot read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. I used to see the world exactly the way that this person does. And during that time, I truly believed that my way of understanding the world was the most compassionate way to understand human suffering. But now I can see how narrow and incomplete that compassion really was. During my years as a radical feminist, the invisibility of male pain was invisible to me. Go figure. So today we're going to be responding to a response of a response. Very Gen Z of me. So this woman posted the original post. Me when it's time to take a moment of silence for men's mental health. Then we see this man's response.
600,000 men kill themselves every year due to mental health issues.
Let that sink in for a second. 600,000. And I'm sure that the man who posted that, like every man I know, has names behind that number. Friends and brothers and classmates and teammates and coworkers, people that they grew up with, people that they didn't even know were struggling. They died quietly. They died believing that the world would be better off without them. So now we have a response to that response made by this college professor, an English professor to be exact, So he's in the humanities, the field that is supposed to teach us about the human experience and to guide us in understanding the human condition. So hopefully he'll be grateful that this man made the response in defense of all of the men that are deeply suffering and are dying.
The very first time that I went to therapy, I was 25 years old. I recently started my PhD, and I was just beginning to work on my dissertation. Or rather, trying to work on my dissertation. I was completely overwhelmed, had never taken on a project like this before, didn't know what I was doing, how to even really get started. Like, my confidence was badly shaken for, the first time in my life. And still, I only went to therapy at the urging of my then partner. And the second time that I went to therapy a few years later, it would again be at the urging of the woman that I was romantically involved with. And my experience here is hardly unique. Among men partnered with women, it is often the case that we only go to therapy at the urging of our partner. Monitoring our mental health is yet one more piece of the mental and emotional labor that we expect of our female partners in opposite sex relationships. So when the woman at the beginning of this video is poking fun at recognizing men's mental health, I think that it's with this perspective in mind. That being that men's mental health, that our mental health is always on their mind. Our mental health has always been made the responsibility of the women that birth us, that raise us, that we date, that we marry, that we raise. So while I absolutely appreciate why this would rub a men's mental health advocate the wrong way, I think that a little bit of understanding is in order. Because what a lot of women are hearing right now is that they are not recognizing, they are not doing work that they do all year round. And that, understandably, I think, they would really like to see us start taking the initiative on and do for ourselves. Because far too many men on here have turned Men's Mental Health Month into Women Aren't Doing Enough for Me Month, which is wild considering that most of us only learned about the idea of mental health from the women in our lives in the first place.
Yeah. He never denies that men are suffering, but he reframes that suffering through the lens of how it impacts women. There's no compassion in this professor's response. There is no acknowledgement of the grief or of the heartbreak. There's no reckoning with the amount of pain that the man before is alluding to. Instead, he intellectualizes, he redirects, he abstracts. He prioritizes female emotional discomfort over male death, even in a moment meant for men's mental health. He insists that we zoom out and remember who the real victims are. It's not the 600,000 men who kill themselves every year, but the women who have to deal with it. And this is a humanities professor. And he hasn't gone rogue. This is just the culture of academia. Anyone deep enough in this thinking would have come to the same conclusion. And if this were a few years ago, I would have agreed with his take. It's not about him. It's about the ideology that shaped his response, the framework that teaches us how to interpret human suffering. Within this lens, men's pain will never be the priority. It will always come second or third or fourth to someone with the identity who we've already decided gets to be the true victim. No matter how sincere the grief, no matter how staggering the numbers, dismissal of that pain is always justified. What he's actually saying is, men, it's your fault that you're dying because you won't go to therapy. We're going to look at every other systemic issue as a systemic issue, but any failure of men is because the individual men aren't enough. He hears that number and he can see the grief in this man's face, and his contribution to the conversation is, well, this woman poking fun of mental health is justified because I only went to therapy when my girlfriend made me. As if that proves something. As if male suicide is just another example of how men fail women. There's no heartbreak or sadness or sorrow, just the certainty that the real issue is not our indifference to male pain. It's that women are tired of having to deal with it. Apparently, even in death, men should be scolded for not asking for help in the way that we've determined is the correct way for them to ask for help. This is the outcome of an ideology that sees the world in binaries, oppressor versus oppressed. So by that logic, the pain of the oppressed is always more valid and more important and more human than anything that the oppressor could ever feel. When we have the world broken up into abused and abusers, you're always going to care more about the abused than you do about the abusers. Here is a line from my actual graduate school textbook. Men cannot be oppressed as men. That is why male pain must be reframed as male guilt. Why male suicide becomes yet another burden that women are expected to carry. Why compassion for men must be justified, qualified, or withheld. Because within this framework, men weren't only born into privilege, they were born as the problem. If the point of this ideology that informed this professor's response is that it's supposed to benefit women, it doesn't. This ideology doesn't just misrepresent men, it actively builds resentment. It removes all aspects of what relationships are and teaches us to only see relationships as power struggles. It tells us not to see male pain as anything other than evidence of entitlement, as resistance, or as manipulation. This perspective doesn't just block compassion from men, but it robs women and men of understanding. It robs us of the ability to see our partners and our sons and our fathers, not as human beings with stories and with wounds and with hearts, but as symbols of power who should be held responsible for our suffering. I made this channel because I see what happens when society chooses to ignore male pain. I sit in my office on a monthly basis with men who are seriously considering ending their lives. These are not abusive or bad people. These are good and loving men who sincerely believe that they would improve the world by removing themselves from it. These men deserve compassion and they deserve to be cared about. If your feminism requires you to dismiss statistics of male suicide, if your ideology can only understand male pain as something that inconveniences women, then your framework is not liberation. It is cruelty wrapped in theory and fancy language. When we use this simple framework and we see men as our oppressors, we stop seeing them as humans. So if you are trained in the way that I was to dismiss male pain, I invite you to start unlearning that. Telling men that they need to get their act together before we care about them killing themselves is like pouring bleach on a plant and being like, I'm not going to stop until you bloom. It's backwards. It's cruel, and it completely ignores the reality of how growth actually happens. You cannot hate someone into changing. You must nurture them into it. So in a world where male pain is constantly minimized or explained away, where men are told that they deserve their suffering, choose to be this guy instead. Choosing to stand up for yourself and to stand up for men and boys in a culture that tells them that they're morally bankrupt just for being born a man, that is powerful and that is necessary. This is not about sides. This is about humanity. I did not make this video to dwell in sadness. I made it because male pain deserves to be seen. Optimism is a choice, and I do not believe that this story ends in despair. Because all around us, change is already happening. There are so many advocates and educators and everyday people who are speaking up and stepping out and creating spaces where boys and men are understood and where they're not required to apologize for existing. Male pain is real, but so is male strength. And when we meet that pain with care, not contempt, we don't just change individual lives, we work toward building a world where men and boys know that they matter. And that is a world worth fighting for. Thank you very much for watching. And we already know what the comments are going to say about me, so I'm gonna get ahead of it now and say that you should pick me by liking and subscribing to my channel.
So pick me. Choose me.
Subscribe to
Me.
Now please go take care of the boys and men in your life, and I will talk to you soon.